Welcome to the video, guys. I had to bring to your attention this greasy snivelling shitweasel from the EU. He is the Vice President of the European Union, who appeared on BBC News earlier on talking about the European Union's performance in relation to the coronavirus, their PPE procurement scheme, and of course Brexit. Which, in true EU fashion, he essentially lies about everything he is saying, along with practically calling for a universal healthcare system in Europe controlled by Brussels, because he wants to shirk the blame for the situation that has occurred in the EU on to the individual member states. I mean, he even goes as far as to blame countries like Italy and so on who closed their borders early on during the crisis for the EU's current performance, which I think you will agree is just nonsensical. He makes a piss-poor attempt at defending the EU's PPE scheme, you know, the one that the Ramona-biased media has been screaming about us not joining, which it seems has still not delivered anything substantial, if it's delivered anything at all, because from the way he answers the question, or refuses to the first time, I would suggest that the EU procurement scheme might well have delivered absolutely nothing. And to top it off, he also claims that the UK is lucky we're still in the European Union when this coronavirus situation has occurred, because we wouldn't have no food. It's as if no other country in the world has food during this coronavirus, only the European Union, who must be providing it to the world, in this imbecile's opinion. So, let's just take a listen to what he actually had to say.
You just told me that if you'd converged earlier, then lives would have been saved.
Yes, because in areas that pertain to the way the healthcare systems are organized, these are national decisions. When it came to making sure that member states could together, through common tenders, buy public protective equipment, we did that. When we forced member states to coordinate restrictions on our internal border to ensure that these green lanes trucks can provide goods and in our supermarkets, we did that. When we tried to inject flexibility in our state aid rules and public procurement rules, we did that. So, but we did that at a moment where much of the damage has been done by uncoordinated action from member states early on.
So you heard it there, he claims they could have saved more lives if each individual member state's health system would have been controlled by Brussels, where they could have took some action. You know, much like the action we've seen them take over the last couple of months, which has put them in the shit show they currently find themselves in. Yeah, that is the sort of action that people really need, isn't it? I can't believe this guy's attempts at coming on here trying to defend the European Union's position. I mean, you even hear him bigging up their PPE scheme, which, as I said a moment ago, is complete nonsense and has delivered next to nothing. We've had the media here complaining about PPE shortages, while not once pointing out the fact that the European Union countries have been struggling also, even more than us, to the point where there was actually £5 million worth of EU PPE stored in the UK waiting for us to send to them. So much for your procurement scheme, you're actually getting it from the UK, while our hospitals are apparently running out, which you can see on the screen here, from the 25th of April. So stick your PPE scheme right up your jacksy, mate. He also goes on about how great the EU is in that it's forced member states to keep borders open so they could transfer food, which was never in any doubt. The member states that did close their borders was not doing it to stop the free-flowing food movement. They was doing it for people. Food was still going to flow both ways because people in the country still need to eat. The governments are aware of this. But we get to the real cherry on top there at the end of that clip, which is him saying the real damage had been done by member states unilaterally taking decisions on their own, i.e. Italy and such closing their borders, as I said earlier. So shift the blame for the EU's performance in this situation onto the shoulders of Italy, the country who has suffered the most during this situation. Yeah, that makes sense and seems to me very much like what we would expect from the European Union and its snivelling shitweasels like this greasy toad we have here. I actually can't believe he's got the audacity to come on here and try and blame Italy for the EU's piss-poor performance during this situation, which has been well documented, as you all know. But he's not finished there. We have to move on to the PPE and then, of course, Brexit. So let's get on with it.
When will the joint EU procurement scheme for personal protective equipment and ventilators deliver any products, or has it done so now?
Well, as you know, this was one of the first processes that allowed our member states to join forces and collectively optimize their access to PPE. All these procedures on masks and ventilators are ongoing, and I'm very comfortable that results are coming in. In any case, without these joint public procurement efforts, many of our member states would be practically unable to access these goods individually.
But no items have been delivered so far, is that correct?
No, this is not correct. Some items have been delivered and others are being delivered, and there will be others that will be delivered in few weeks. That's my understanding of how these procurement calls are evolving.
Yeah.
Right, so he was asked a direct question there. When will this PPE scheme actually deliver the goods to the member states? Because we are months into this situation and after it was announced, and guess what? Nothing has happened. PPE is still short in the EU, and the procurement scheme has been shown to just be a useless bit of bluff and bluster from the incompetent European Union. Helped, of course, in this country by the mainstream media, who has pumped it out, saying how bad the UK was for not joining it, when it seems we can buy PPE from any country around the world, as we have already been doing, without an issue, while the EU sits there waiting weeks and weeks for even basic PPE. Where are all the Ramonas now, including venereal disease herself? We all know she absolutely despises Brexit and fully promotes all of these anti-Brexit fake news stories. Yet here, she is kind of trying to hold this guy to task, though, being the venereal disease, she does a completely piss-poor job, as you would expect. I mean, you heard him say all of these things for PPE masks, ventilators and the such are still ongoing, and he's happy with the way it is going, meaning they haven't even got the items yet, they're still waiting on it, but he's going to try and swing it and make it look like the EU has done something great, when in actual fact they appear to be behind every other country in the world when it comes to procuring PPE. Maybe Africa might be slightly behind them, though given the lies that are coming out of this guy's mouth by the sounds of it, I would suggest maybe African nations might have a better handle on PPE, aside from ventilators obviously, than these complete dipshits over in the European Union. And I really don't know what world he's living in, claiming that without this joint PPE procurement scheme, many EU member states wouldn't be able to access any of them. How is that even possible? If they wasn't part of the EU and in some joint procurement scheme, like us, they could literally just buy it from any of the countries that we have bought it from, and obviously got it much quicker than your European Union procurement scheme has, because you are still waiting for it, remember, and you're just happy with the way it is going, with it expected to come in the next couple of weeks. It just amazes me that these people can come on here and blatantly lie like this. VD once again asked him the same question that he's just avoided for the last minute or so, and he does kind of answer, saying that they have received some, though he's not exactly being specific. So they could have just received a packet of gloves or something, allowing him to claim that they have therefore succeeded in procuring PPE for the European Union. I mean, as you heard him say, there are others being delivered and more being delivered in a few weeks when they might not well be needed, because the situation does seem to be passing at the moment. This could of course be wrong, but I'm seeing a lot of countries opening up, with the UK plan to start next week, obviously. But now let's move on and see what he has to say about Brexit and how lucky we are to still be a part of the European Union.
I want to ask you about Brexit, if I may. I'm broadcasting from the UK. The British government says it has no intention to extend the Brexit transition period. Do you think a free trade agreement between the UK and the EU can be done in the time left up until the end of the year?
Well, as you know, Michel Barnier and our teams are continuing to engage and negotiate with our British counterparts, even during these difficult times. of course, our common objective is to get something going for the 1st of January when the transitional period expires. By the way, I think it's quite fortunate that the United Kingdom goes through the pandemics with this certainty of being part of the single market. I don't want to think what would have happened in the UK if the country would have been subject to the crisis having been out of the single market, as the cliff edge exit would have implied, but this is a parenthesis only.
Well, you think the UK would have coped less well with coronavirus had we been outside the EU?
Absolutely. I think.
What's your evidence for saying that?
Part of the success of the supply chains of our single market that kept our supermarkets and our markets stocked during these difficult times is precisely because the single market makes sure that this happens. So it was a fortunate thing that we insisted for this orderly exit that allowed for the UK to be part of the single market in these difficult times. But
right, well, we don't really care about his thoughts on whether we can get a deal or not. If the EU keep playing the games that they're playing, they won't have a deal, and we will leave on WTO terms by the end of the year, which will be sweet music to my ears, you better believe that. But I really cannot believe the audacity of this prick to sit there and say that the UK is fortunate that we are still in the EU because of its supply lines, like other nations around the world have not been able to get food into their country. This is just complete nonsense. The only people struggling to get things in through their supply lines appears to be the European Union when it comes to PPE, as we have just seen, and the BBC host kind of held you to task on, but pussyfooted around it and moved on to Brexit. I mean, to be honest, I know the reason why. He is actually saying it's lucky that the UK is part of the European Union while going through this pandemic, because we sent them £75 million just the other day. I wonder how much more we're going to be sending them over the course of time before we finally leave the European Union transition period that we are currently in. You can bet they are going to milk us for as much as they possibly can over the next 6 or 7 months. So no, the UK is not lucky. We're paying you billions of pounds a month, plus who knows what else. That I do not consider lucky. We could be spending that money on ourselves, on our own businesses, and many other things, rather than you snivelling shitweasels over there. So take your pro-EU dribble and promote it somewhere else. The BBC shouldn't even be talking to you right now, in my opinion. But I can tell you what would have happened if the UK hadn't been a part of the EU right now and we had fully left long ago. We would probably be in a much better position than we are now, because our economy would have been much bigger than it was, being held back by the European Union, which is what it does. As always though, I do have to pull up Victoria Derbyshire. At first he makes it look like she is actually going to hold him to task for sitting there blatantly talking shit, as you heard her ask him for actual evidence of what he's saying. But when he gives this so-called evidence to her, which I'm sure you will all agree is not evidence but just his opinion, and one that is not based in reality, she lets it go and just ends the interview after he has finished waffling a load of old shit. You are supposed to represent the British people and the taxpayer who is actually funding your life, not sit there and give half-assed challenges to these EU shitweasels who deserve to be held to task properly for talking this amount of nonsense on our TV stations. Given the reports coming out of the EU over the last weeks and months, I would suggest everything this snivelling shitweasel has said is complete bullshit. I mean, so much for EU solidarity. He started the clips I was showing you by blaming member states for the situation the EU finds itself in, when in actual fact, if Italy and other states hadn't closed their borders on their own, the situation in them countries would likely be 10 times worse. But you've got the front of a double-decker bus to come on the TV and sit there talking about how great the EU is while saying we're lucky, when we all know the current shit show that's going on, not just around the coronavirus, but the budget and the bailout for the coronavirus. Actually, when you take them into consideration, you should be hiding in your hole at home, ashamed with yourselves, not sitting there saying how lucky the UK is. We will be lucky that we're out of the European Union for good on December 31st. That is the only thing I consider lucky in relation to the UK, because the Remain establishment could well have rigged the referendum result in 2016, which I'm sure they wish they did now. Now, before I go, I've started doing live streams and uploading gaming content on my second channel. If you would like to come and join me for a live stream to chat in real time, have an interest in gaming related content on YouTube, or just want to follow me over there because you are a legend, the link will be down in the video description below and as a pinned comment. I hope to see you all there. Now, as always, before I go, I want to thank our PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar and YouTube members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe with the notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I will see you all in the next one.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors. Slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires. And that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going and we are glad to be going. We're off.